The polished marble floors of Viridian Dynamics gleamed under the soft hum of recessed lighting, reflecting the sharp angles of glass-walled offices and the occasional blur of someone rushing to a meeting that probably could have been an email. Outside, the city pulsed with traffic and ambition, but inside, everything moved with a kind of hushed precision, like a museum where the exhibits were spreadsheets and power suits. And then there was her. She moved quietly, almost like part of the building itself, wheels of her cart whispering over tile, the soft swish of a microfiber cloth over a conference table still warm from afternoon arguments about quarterly targets. No one really looked at her. Not the junior analysts scrolling through their phones while waiting for coffee. Not the middle managers barking into Bluetooth headsets. And certainly not the executives who strode through the lobby like they owned the air around them. To them, she was just part of the background noise, like the AC or the printer that jammed every Tuesday. But she saw everything. She saw the way the finance director left confidential reports open on his desk, pages fluttering in the draft from the vent above. She saw the marketing lead sneak a bottle of wine into the supply closet during a team-building offsite that ended with someone crying in the stairwell. She heard the whispered complaints about the CEO, the man whose name was etched in brushed steel by the elevator, who'd once yelled at an intern so loudly that the security cameras picked up the echo 3 floors down. Most people assumed she didn't understand the language of boardrooms or balance sheets. They didn't know she'd spent 10 years as a regional operations director before life threw a curveball, a family emergency, a sudden move, a need for something stable and quiet while she got back on her feet. Taking this job wasn't a step down. It was a pause, a chance to breathe. And when the private equity firm that owned Viridian reached out with a discreet offer, "We need eyes on the ground, someone who won't be noticed," she said yes. Not for the money, but because she knew what toxic leadership looked like, and she'd seen enough companies crumble from the inside out. So she traded her blazers for a navy blue uniform, pinned her ID badge low on her chest, and walked through the employee entrance like she'd always belonged there. No fanfare, no introductions, just another face in the rotation of overnight staff who kept the place spotless while the important people slept. At first it was easy. The late shift meant fewer people, less performance, more truth. She'd find crumpled sticky notes in trash bins with scribbled threats, like, "Fix this or you're gone." She'd see the real exhaustion in the eyes of the IT guy who stayed until 2 a.m. patching systems the CEO refused to update. She even overheard 2 senior VPs confessing over lukewarm pizza that they were updating their resumes. This ship's sinking, and Thorne's too busy polishing his name on the lifeboat to notice. But as weeks passed, the daytime shifts began to reveal a different kind of rot. It started small, a snide comment when she reached for the same coffee pot as a project manager. "Careful, that's for employees, not, well, you know." A smirk when she asked someone to move their bag off a chair she needed to wipe down. Then came the pranks. Her cleaning supplies accidentally locked in a storage room, her break scheduled during a fire drill, her name misspelled on the staff board as Evelina, even after she corrected it 3 times. One Tuesday, someone left a printout on the copy machine titled "Top 10 Reasons Why Cleaners Should Stay in the Basement." It wasn't funny. It wasn't clever. It was just mean. And it was pinned to the break room bulletin board like a trophy. She didn't react, not outwardly. But she noted who laughed, who walked past without tearing it down, who added a crude doodle in the margin. What hurt most wasn't the cruelty. It was the assumption that she didn't matter, that her presence was temporary, disposable, unworthy of basic decency. They didn't know she'd once led a team of 50 through a company merger, that she'd negotiated vendor contracts worth millions, that she could spot a red flag in a financial statement faster than most CFOs. But she played her part, smiled when spoken to, nodded when ignored, kept her eyes down, her voice soft, her movements efficient, all while collecting pieces of a puzzle no one else seemed to realize was missing. Because beneath the surface of Viridian Dynamics, something was unraveling. The CEO, Richard Thorne, had always been intense, demanding, a visionary, his bio called him. But lately his behavior had crossed from driven to dangerous. He'd canceled 3 town halls in a row, slashed the wellness budget while approving a $200,000 renovation for his private office. And just last week he'd fired the head of HR after she raised concerns about a string of unexplained expenses tied to his travel accounts. Rumors swirled in hushed tones near the water cooler. Offshore transfers, secret side deals, a luxury condo in Dubai paid for with company funds, but no one had proof, and no one dared speak up, because Thorne had a habit of burying dissenters under bad performance reviews or sudden restructuring layoffs. Except, Evelyn wasn't afraid. She'd seen leaders like him before, charismatic on the outside, hollow at the core. They thrived on fear, not respect. And fear, she knew, only lasted until someone stopped being scared. One night, while wiping down the executive floor, she found a folder left open on Thorne's desk. Not locked, not password protected, just sitting there like an invitation. Inside were emails, dozens of them, discussing a shell company registered in the Caymans with payments routed through Viridian's consulting line item. Dates matched up with Thorne's business trips. Amounts added up to nearly $500,000. Her hands didn't shake. Her breath stayed even, but her mind raced. This wasn't just mismanagement. This was fraud. She took a photo with her phone, discreet, angled to avoid glare, and slipped the folder back exactly as she'd found it. Then she finished mopping the hallway, emptied the trash bins, and clocked out at 3:15 a.m. like any other night. But the next morning, she sent a secure message to the private equity contact who'd hired her. Just 3 words: "We have proof." The response came within minutes. "Stay in position. Do not engage. We're activating Phase 2. She didn't know what Phase 2 was. But she knew one thing for certain. The days of being invisible were almost over. Because soon the people who mocked her, ignored her, treated her like furniture, they'd have to look her in the eye. And when they did, they'd realize they'd been cleaning up after the wrong person all along. For now, though, she returned to her cart, filled her bucket with warm soapy water, and pushed it down the hall toward the next empty office. The building was quiet. The city outside was waking up. And somewhere deep in the corporate machine, the gears were beginning to turn, not toward collapse, but toward justice. She didn't need a title to know her worth. But soon everyone else would, and when that moment came, it wouldn't be loud. It wouldn't be dramatic. It would be calm, precise, and utterly undeniable, like the click of a key turning in a lock that's been jammed for far too long. Until then, she kept cleaning, watching, waiting. Because the best revolutions don't start with a shout. They start with someone who refuses to look away. The days began to blur together. Early mornings, late nights, the same corridors, the same faces that never quite saw her. But something had shifted. Ever since she'd sent that message with the photo of the folder, there was a quiet tension in the air, like the moment before a storm breaks. She didn't change her routine. She still wore the same uniform, still pushed the same cart, still nodded politely when someone muttered a half-hearted thanks or, more often, nothing at all. But now every interaction carried weight. Every overheard conversation felt like a clue, and the cruelty didn't stop, it just got louder. One afternoon, as she wiped down the kitchenette on the 5th floor, 2 junior staff members walked in, laughing about something that had happened in a meeting. They didn't notice her at first. Then one of them spotted her and nudged the other. "Oh, sorry," he said, not sounding sorry at all. Didn't realize the help was still here. They both snickered and started rummaging through the fridge, talking over her like she wasn't even in the room. She kept scrubbing the counter, her movements steady. But inside, something hardened. It wasn't just about disrespect anymore. It was about power, the way some people used small meannesses to remind others of their place. And in this building, her place was clearly beneath them. Later that week, someone left a half-eaten sandwich on a conference table with a sticky note that read, "For the cleaner, hope you like leftovers." She tossed it without a word. But she remembered who'd been in that room earlier. A project lead with a reputation for cutting corners and taking credit for other people's work. Still, she stayed focused. The real story wasn't in the petty jabs. It was in what was happening behind closed doors. And then came the intern. She first noticed the young woman during a late shift. Barely out of college, eyes wide with that mix of excitement and terror that comes with your first real job. She was working overtime, hunched over a laptop in a corner office, fingers flying across the keyboard. Evelyn passed by quietly, but the intern looked up and offered a tired smile. "Long night," she said softly. "Looks like it," Evelyn replied. They didn't talk much after that, but over the next few days, Evelyn saw her everywhere, grabbing coffee at 7 a.m., staying past midnight, always carrying a stack of files like they might vanish if she set them down. There was a quiet determination about her, the kind that gets crushed too easily in places like this. Then one evening, Evelyn heard raised voices coming from the CEO's office. She was mopping near the stairwell, far enough not to seem like she was listening, but close enough to catch the tone. It was sharp, aggressive, threatening. "You think I don't know what you've been digging into?" the CEO snapped. "You're lucky I don't have you blacklisted before sunrise. One word to anyone and your career is over before it starts." A pause. Then a shaky voice, clearly the intern, said, "I was just following the audit trail. It's my job." "Your job is to do what you're told," came the reply, cold and final. "Not play detective." Evelyn didn't move. She kept mopping, her back to the hallway, heart pounding. She didn't need to see the scene to know what was happening. This wasn't just bad leadership, it was intimidation. And it was working. The next day, the intern was gone. No goodbye email. No farewell cake in the break room. Just an empty desk, a stripped nameplate, and whispers that she'd quit suddenly for personal reasons. But Evelyn knew better. She'd seen the fear in that young woman's eyes the night before. And she knew exactly what kind of personal reasons powerful men invented when they wanted someone to disappear. That was the moment everything clicked. It wasn't just about money or ego anymore. It was about people, real people being pushed out, silenced, or broken because they dared to ask questions. And if no one stood up, it would keep happening. So Evelyn did something risky. During her break the next evening, she lingered near the finance department's open workspace. She knew the team well, not by name but by habit. One analyst always left at 6:30 sharp. Another kept energy drinks stacked like building blocks. And then there was the quiet one, the one who always stayed late, who double-checked every number, who once muttered under his breath, "This doesn't add up," loud enough for Evelyn to hear. She waited until the floor was nearly empty. Then, as she refilled the paper towels in the nearby restroom, she let her cart roll just a little too close to his desk. When he looked up startled, she gave him a small, tired smile. "Sorry," she said. "Wheels stick sometimes." He nodded, distracted, eyes back on his screen. But then he paused, looked at her again. Maybe it was the way she held his gaze a second too long, or maybe he was just exhausted and lonely. Either way, he sighed and leaned back in his chair. "You know," he said quietly, "you're the only person around here who says sorry like they actually mean it." She didn't respond right away. Just wiped a smudge off the edge of his desk, something no one else would have noticed. Then she said, "Must be hard carrying all those numbers in your head." He laughed, but it was hollow. "Sometimes I wish I didn't notice them at all." And that was the opening. Over the next few nights, their conversations grew longer. Always casual, always in passing. But slowly, carefully, she asked questions, not about secrets, just about stress. About pressure. About things that didn't feel right, and he began to talk, not all at once. Not in a dramatic confession, but in fragments. A payment labeled consulting that went to a company with no website. A vendor invoice signed by someone who'd left the company months ago. A series of wire transfers approved with no oversight. "The system's supposed to catch that," he admitted one night, rubbing his temples. "But every time I flag something, it gets resolved before I can follow up. Like someone higher up is cleaning the trail before it reaches the board." She didn't react, just nodded. "Must be frustrating." "It's terrifying," he whispered. "Because if I push too hard, I'll be next." She understood. And in that moment, she made a decision. The next evening, she brought him a thermos of tea. Nothing fancy, just chamomile, the kind that helps you sleep when your mind won't shut off. When he looked surprised, she said, "You look like you could use it." He accepted it with a quiet thanks. Then, after a long pause, he said, "You ever feel like you're the only one who sees what's really going on?" She met his eyes. "No," she said softly. "You're not alone." He didn't ask what she meant, but something in her voice must have told him she knew more than she let on. A few days later, he slipped a folded piece of paper into the pocket of her uniform as she passed by. No words, just a nod. Back in the supply closet, her temporary sanctuary, she unfolded it. It was a printed list, dates, account numbers, transaction IDs, and at the bottom a single line, "Follow the money. It leads to him." She memorized it. Then she tore it into tiny pieces and flushed them down the toilet. Now she had more than suspicion. She had a trail, but she also knew time was running out. Rumors were spreading that the board was planning a surprise audit. Thorne was getting nervous, snapping at assistants, canceling meetings, locking his office door even when he wasn't inside. And the tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. One night as she cleaned the executive lounge, she found a crumpled email printout in the trash. It was from Thorne's assistant, addressed to legal. Per Richard's request, please prepare termination docs for analyst 44822. Cite performance issues, effective immediately. She recognized the employee ID. It was the quiet analyst. They were coming for him. She couldn't let that happen. That night, instead of going home after her shift, she stayed. She waited until the building was empty, truly empty, and then she went to work. Not with a mop, but with her phone, her memory, and the quiet courage of someone who'd seen enough. She compiled everything. The photos, the notes, the timeline of suspicious transactions, the witness accounts, anonymous but detailed, the pattern of firings targeting anyone who asked questions. She organized it into a single, clear report, simple language, no jargon, just facts. Then she encrypted it and sent it to the private equity firm's secure portal, along with a message. They're about to silence another witness. Act now. Within an hour, her phone buzzed. Not a text, a call. She stepped into the stairwell, heart in her throat, and answered. A calm, professional voice said, "We've reviewed your materials. We believe you. We're flying in tomorrow. Stay visible, stay safe. And whatever you do, don't confront him." She hung up, took a deep breath, looked out the window at the city lights below. For the first time in weeks, she felt something close to hope, but she also knew the hardest part was coming, because Thorne wasn't the kind of man who went down quietly. And when he realized someone had been watching, really watching, he wouldn't just get angry, he'd get dangerous. Still, she walked back to her cart, straightened her uniform, and finished her rounds. The floors needed mopping. The trash needed emptying. The illusion needed to hold just a little longer, because soon, the truth wouldn't need shouting. It would simply walk in, sit down, and refuse to leave. And when that happened, the people who'd laughed, mocked, and looked away, they'd finally have to face what they'd helped create. But for now, she kept cleaning. One swipe at a time, one secret at a time. One step closer to the day she wouldn't need a mop to clean up this mess. The morning after she sent the final report, the air in the building felt different, charged. Like the seconds before lightning strikes, Evelyn moved through her usual routine, but every sound seemed sharper. The click of heels on marble, the hum of the elevator, the low murmur of voices behind closed doors. She kept her head down, her hands steady, her expression neutral. But inside she was counting minutes. She'd been told the private equity team would arrive under the radar, posing as external consultants reviewing operational efficiency. That meant suits, briefcases, and fake IDs. It also meant she couldn't acknowledge them, not even with a glance. For now, she was still just the cleaner, and that invisibility was her greatest weapon. By mid-morning, they were already in the building. 3 of them, calm, professional, asking polite questions about workflow and staffing. No one batted an eye. Executives barely looked up from their screens when the consultants walked by. After all, who cared about another audit? They'd survived plenty before. But Evelyn noticed everything. She saw the way the lead investigator, a woman with sharp eyes and a quiet voice, paused outside the CEO's office, studying the nameplate like it held a secret. She saw how the team requested access to financial records for benchmarking, and how Thorne's assistant hesitated before handing over the files. Most telling of all, she saw the flicker of panic in Thorne's eyes when he spotted them in the hallway. He didn't recognize them, but he recognized the look of people who weren't here to flatter him. That afternoon, things escalated. Evelyn was wiping down the lobby reception desk when she overheard Thorne barking into his phone in the stairwell just around the corner. "I don't care what they say they're here for," he hissed. "Dig into their credentials. Find out who sent them, and if they ask for anything beyond surface-level data, tell them it's under legal review. He sounded rattled. Good. But then came the part that made her blood run cold. And get rid of that analyst in finance, he added, voice dropping lower. Today, I don't want him talking to anyone. Evelyn's hand stilled on the counter. The quiet analyst, the one who'd slipped her the list, was about to be fired. Or worse, framed. She had to act, but she couldn't run to him. Couldn't warn him outright. That would blow her cover and put them both at risk. So she did the only thing she could. She used the system against itself. During her next break, she accidentally left her cart parked near the mailroom, right where the outgoing termination notices were processed. While pretending to fix a loose wheel, she glanced at the stack of envelopes waiting for pickup. And there it was, a crisp manila envelope with the analyst's name on it. She didn't touch it, but she memorized the tracking number on the shipping label. Back in the supply closet, she pulled out her phone and sent a coded message to her contact at the private equity firm. Package en route. Recipient finance. Contents termination. Intercept if possible. Within 20 minutes, she saw one of the consultants casually stroll into the mailroom, chatting with the clerk about delivery protocols. 10 minutes after that, the envelope was gone, replaced by a blank sheet of paper in the outgoing bin. They'd stopped it, but Thorne wouldn't wait. If the paper trail failed, he'd go straight to the source. Sure enough, by 4 p.m., Evelyn spotted him storming toward the finance floor, face tight with fury. She followed at a distance, pushing her cart slowly, pretending to check light fixtures. When he reached the analyst's desk, the young man stood up immediately, shoulders tense. You've got 5 minutes to clear out your things, Thorne said, loud enough for nearby desks to hear. Security will escort you out, the analyst paled. On what grounds? Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Thorne snapped. You know exactly why you're being let go. A hush fell over the floor. People pretended to work, but their eyes darted between the two like they were watching a car crash in slow motion. Then, just as Thorne turned to leave, a calm voice cut through the tension. I'm afraid that won't be happening. Everyone turned. It was the lead investigator, the woman from the consultant team. She stood at the end of the aisle, briefcase in hand, expression unreadable. Thorne frowned. And you are? Representing the firm that owns 68% of this company, she said simply. We've placed a temporary hold on all personnel actions pending the completion of our review. That includes terminations, transfers, and... She paused, meeting his eyes. Intimidation tactics. The room went dead silent. Thorne's face flushed. This is an internal matter. You have no authority here. I have every authority, she replied, stepping closer. And if you attempt to remove this employee, or any employee without our approval, you'll be in breach of your employment agreement. Is that understood? For a moment, no one moved. Then Thorne gave a tight nod and walked away, fists clenched at his sides. The analyst sank back into his chair, trembling. Evelyn didn't stay to watch. She turned her cart and headed for the stairwell, heart pounding. It had worked. They'd protected him. But now Thorne knew he was under real scrutiny, and desperate men do desperate things. That night she stayed later than usual, not to clean but to watch. She stationed herself near the executive floor, pretending to refill soap dispensers. Around 9 p.m., she saw Thorne return to his office alone. He wasn't carrying a briefcase, just a small, locked metal box. She waited until he left again, this time in a hurry, coat half on, phone pressed to his ear. The moment the elevator doors closed, she moved. She didn't break in. She didn't need to. Earlier that week, while dusting his desk, she'd noticed a pattern. He always left his spare key taped under the third drawer. Arrogant. Careless. Exactly what she'd hoped for. Her hands didn't shake as she retrieved the key. She unlocked the bottom drawer, found the box, and opened it. Inside were flash drives, a passport, and a stack of printed emails, backup copies of the same transactions she'd documented. He was preparing to run. She took one photo of the contents, just one. Then she closed the box, returned the key, and walked away like she'd never been there. Back in the stairwell, she sent the photo with a single line. He's planning to disappear. Move fast. The reply came instantly. Board emergency meeting, tomorrow, 8 a.m., be there. Her breath caught. Tomorrow, everything would change. She spent the rest of the night finishing her rounds, her mind racing. She thought about the intern who'd vanished, the analyst who'd almost been fired, the dozens of employees who'd swallowed their pride just to keep a paycheck. And she thought about all the times she'd been called invisible, and as if that made her harmless, but invisibility had its advantages. It let you see what others refused to. It let you listen when no one thought you mattered, and sometimes it let you stand in the shadows just long enough to pull the whole rotten structure down. The next morning, she arrived early, earlier than usual. She wore her uniform, but she'd pressed it crisp. Her hair was neat, her posture straight. She wasn't hiding anymore. Not really. At 7:45 a.m., she saw the private equity team arrive, not through the main lobby, but through the service entrance, like they belonged there. They nodded to her as they passed. Not a big gesture, just enough to say, "We see you." At 8 a.m. sharp, the board members began filing into the main conference room, faces she recognized from annual reports, now looking uneasy. Thorne arrived last, tie slightly crooked, eyes darting like a cornered animal. Evelyn didn't go in. She stood outside the glass wall, cart parked nearby, pretending to polish the door handle. But she could see everything. The lead investigator stood at the head of the table. She didn't raise her voice, didn't slam her fist. She just laid out the evidence, transaction by transaction, email by email, witness account by witness account. She showed how funds had been diverted, how dissenters were silenced, how the company's culture had become a breeding ground for fear. And then she said the words Evelyn had been waiting for. This isn't leadership. It's exploitation. And it ends today, Thorne tried to argue, to deflect, to blame miscommunication, but the board wasn't listening. One by one, they turned away from him. At 8:37 a.m., the chairman stood up. "Richard, you're relieved of your duties, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the premises." Thorne's face went white. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. As he was led out, head down, shoulders slumped, he passed right by Evelyn. For the first time, he really looked at her. And in that moment, she didn't look away. She held his gaze. Calm, steady, unbroken, he didn't say a word, but the recognition in his eyes was unmistakable. You. It was you all along. She gave the tiniest nod. Not in triumph. In truth. Yes. It was me, and I was never just the cleaner. The doors closed behind him. Inside the conference room, the board turned to the investigator. "Who takes over?" someone asked. The woman smiled faintly. "Someone who's already here." Then she walked to the door, opened it, and stepped aside. All eyes turned to Evelyn. She didn't flinch. She set down her rag, straightened her shoulders, and walked into the room, not as the woman who mopped their floors, but as the one who'd saved their company. The real work was just beginning, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like justice wasn't just possible. It was already happening. The silence that followed was thick. Not the kind that feels empty, but the kind that hums with change. Evelyn stood just inside the conference room doorway, her uniform still crisp, her hands clean but calloused from hours of unseen labor. Around her, the board members sat frozen, some wide-eyed, others blinking like they'd just woken from a long dream. The lead investigator stepped aside and gave her a small, knowing nod. No grand introduction, no fanfare, just space finally made for her. She didn't stride in like a conqueror. She walked in like someone who'd earned the right to be there. Calm, present, real. "I've been watching this company for weeks," she began, her voice steady but not loud, not from a corner office. "From the floors you walk on, the trash bins you empty into without looking, the late-night halls where people say things they'd never say in daylight." A few board members shifted in their seats. One cleared his throat, but no one interrupted. She went on. "I saw how fear became policy, how loyalty was rewarded only when it meant staying quiet, and how anyone who asked the wrong questions, especially if they weren't in a suit, was made to disappear." She paused, letting the words settle. That's not leadership. That's control. And it's been hurting this company far longer than the numbers show. Then she laid it out, not with anger, but with clarity. She spoke about the missing funds, yes, but also about the human cost. The intern pushed out for doing her job. The analyst nearly fired for noticing discrepancies. The janitorial staff mocked for daring to exist in executive spaces. She didn't exaggerate. She didn't dramatize. She just told the truth. Simple, unvarnished, and impossible to ignore. When she finished, the room stayed quiet for a long moment. Then the oldest board member, a man with silver hair and tired eyes, leaned forward. "What do you propose we do now?" She didn't hesitate. "First, we restore trust. Not with slogans or posters, but with action. We reinstate every employee let go under false pretenses. We audit every suspicious transaction, not just the ones we found, but all of them. And we create a system where anyone, at any level, can speak up without fear." Someone else asked, "And who leads that effort?" She looked around the table. "Someone who's already proven they care more about this company than their title." They didn't argue. They didn't debate. They simply nodded. By noon, an all-hands meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. Evelyn spent the hours in between not preparing a speech, but listening. She walked the floors again, not as a cleaner, but as someone finally seen. People stared. Some whispered. A few looked away, ashamed. But others, especially those who'd been on the receiving end of Thorne's reign, met her eyes with something like hope. At 1:45 p.m., she stood outside the main auditorium, smoothing her blazer. Someone had brought her a fresh one, dark navy, tailored, no logo. It felt strange at first, like wearing someone else's skin, but then she remembered this wasn't a costume. It was a correction. Inside, the room was packed. Employees from every department, IT, marketing, finance, facilities, sat shoulder to shoulder. The air buzzed with nervous energy. Rumors had been flying all morning. Thorne's gone. The board's taking over. Something big is happening. When Evelyn walked onto the stage, the murmuring stopped. She didn't stand behind a lectern, didn't use a microphone at first, just stood there, hands at her sides, and said, "You all know me, or at least you think you do." A few people exchanged glances. "For the past 6 weeks," she continued, "I've cleaned your offices. I've emptied your trash. I've heard your complaints, your secrets, your late-night confessions to no one in particular. And for most of that time, you didn't see me as a person, just part of the background." She let that hang in the air, not to shame them, but to remind them. "But here's what you didn't know," she said, voice softening. "I wasn't just cleaning floors. I was assessing this company's health, from the ground up. Because culture isn't built in boardrooms. It's built in break rooms, hallways, and the way you treat the person who refills your coffee." Then she told them the truth about Thorne's fraud. Yes, but more importantly, about the pattern of disrespect that allowed it to thrive. She named no individuals who'd mocked her. No point in revenge. But she made it clear that era was over. And effective immediately, she announced, "I'll be serving as interim COO. Not because I wanted a title, but because someone has to make sure this never happens again." Gasps rippled through the room. Some people sat up straighter. Others looked stunned. She went on. "Starting today, we're launching 3 things. First, a confidential ethics hotline managed by an outside firm, so you can report concerns without fear of retaliation. Second, mandatory training, not just on policies, but on empathy, inclusion, and what real respect looks like. And third," she paused, "we're creating a bridge program, a pathway for support staff to move into corporate roles with mentorship, tuition support, and fair evaluation." That last part drew audible murmurs. A woman in the back, someone Evelyn recognized, from the night shift, wiped her eyes. Then Evelyn did something unexpected. She walked to the edge of the stage and pointed to a man in the 3rd row, the same project lead who'd once joked about leftovers for the cleaner. He froze, face pale, but Evelyn didn't call him out. Instead, she said, "You once told me this building runs on people like you, but it doesn't. It runs on all of us. And if you're willing to learn, there's a place for you in what comes next." He looked down, then nodded slowly. She turned back to the crowd. "This isn't about punishment. It's about repair. About building something better, not just for shareholders, but for everyone who walks through these doors." When she finished, there was a beat of silence. Then from the back, someone started clapping. Not politely, earnestly, others joined. Soon the whole room was on its feet. Not cheering like at a concert, but standing in quiet acknowledgement. In gratitude, in shared relief. After the meeting, people didn't rush back to their desks. They lingered, talked, hugged. Some approached Evelyn not with awe but with questions. Will the intern be coming back?
Can I apply for the bridge program?
Is it really safe to speak up now? She answered each one honestly. We're reaching out to her today. Applications open next week. It will be because we're making it that way. Later that afternoon, she sat in what used to be Thorne's office. Not to gloat, just to plan. The private equity team had offered her a permanent role, but she hadn't decided yet. What mattered now was action, not titles. As she reviewed the first draft of the new ethics policy, there was a knock at the door. It was the quiet analyst from finance, the one who'd almost been fired. You saved my job, he said quietly. No, she replied. You saved your own by doing the right thing. I just made sure it mattered. He smiled, really smiled, for the first time in months. What can I do to help? Stay honest, she said, and keep asking questions. Over the next few days, the changes began to take root. The ethics hotline received its first call within hours, anonymous but detailed. A manager pressuring staff to log false overtime. HR investigated. The manager was placed on leave. The bridge program announcement drew over 100 applications in 48 hours, from custodians, cafeteria workers, security guards, people who'd been told their skills didn't translate. Evelyn made sure each one got a real interview. And then, one rainy Thursday, the intern returned. She walked into the lobby holding a cardboard box with her old belongings, things she'd left behind in her rushed exit. Evelyn met her at the front desk. You don't have to come back, Evelyn said gently. But if you want to, your desk is waiting. And this time you'll have backup. The young woman took a shaky breath. I want to. That afternoon, Evelyn sent a company-wide email, not from a generic leadership address, but from her own name. It read, "Welcome back. And to everyone else, thank you for choosing to stay and help rebuild." There were still challenges ahead. Old habits don't vanish overnight. Some executives resisted the new policies. A few even handed in their resignations, muttering about lowered standards. But for everyone who left, 2 more stepped up, people who'd been waiting for permission to care. And through it all, Evelyn never forgot where she'd started. She still walked the halls. Still asked how people were doing, not as a formality, but because she meant it. And sometimes, late at night, she'd stop by the supply closet, run her hand over the old mop bucket, and remember, real change doesn't always come from the top. Sometimes, it rises from the floor, clean, clear, unstoppable. 6 months later, the building still stood in the same place, but everything inside had shifted. Not in a flashy overnight way, but the kind of change you feel in your bones. Quieter hallways, easier smiles, meetings that actually ended on time. The air didn't hum with tension anymore. It hummed with purpose. Evelyn walked through the lobby one Monday morning, not in a uniform, not in a power suit, but in something in between, tailored slacks, a soft sweater, flats that didn't click like a metronome of authority. She carried a travel mug of tea, the kind she used to brew in the break room when no one noticed her. Now people nodded as she passed. Not out of fear, not out of obligation, just because they saw her and she saw them back. The bridge program was in its second cohort. 12 people had already moved into full-time corporate roles. 3 from custodial staff, 2 from the mailroom, 1 from the cafeteria line. They weren't diversity hires. They were sharp, capable, and finally given a real shot. One of them, a woman who'd spent 10 years restocking paper towels and fixing jammed printers, now led a small team in operations. She'd told Evelyn over coffee last week, "I didn't know I was good at this. I just knew how to keep things running." That was the heart of it, Evelyn realized. Leadership wasn't about titles or corner offices. It was about seeing what needed to be done, and doing it even when no one was watching. The ethics hotline had become more than a reporting tool. It had become a lifeline. Over 100 concerns had been logged, some big, some small, but every single one was investigated, and every outcome was shared transparently, without names, of course. When a senior manager was found to have taken credit for a junior employee's idea, he didn't just get a slap on the wrist. He was required to publicly acknowledge the real creator in a team meeting and mentor them for 6 months. No one was above accountability, not anymore. Even the little things had changed. The break room now had a whiteboard titled Shoutouts, where anyone could write thanks to a coworker. It was usually full by Wednesday. Someone had started a quiet hour every afternoon. No meetings, no calls, just focused work or rest. And the coffee? It was finally decent. Turns out, when you ask the people who actually drink it what they like, you get better results. But the real test came during the quarterly town hall. Evelyn stood at the front of the room again, but this time, she didn't speak first. Instead, she opened the floor. What's working? What's not? And what do you need from me? Hands went up, hesitant at first, then more confident. A new hire asked about parental leave policies. A veteran employee suggested rotating team leads to give more people leadership experience. Someone else pointed out that the mental health resources were great, but hard to access during core hours. Evelyn took notes, not on a tablet. On a yellow legal pad like a human being. Afterward, as she walked back to her office, the analyst, the one who'd almost been fired, caught up with her. You know, he said, I used to think leadership meant having all the answers. And now? She asked. Now I think it means listening long enough to hear the right questions. She smiled. That was progress. Later that week, she got a call from the private equity firm. They wanted to make her role permanent. Full COO, equity stake, a seat at the ownership table. It was everything she'd once worked toward in another life. But she didn't say yes right away. Instead, she asked for time. Not because she wasn't capable, she'd already proven that, but because she wanted to be sure this wasn't just about replacing one leader with another. She wanted to build something that could outlast her. So she proposed a new structure. A rotating leadership council made up of employees from every level, executive, mid-level, and support staff. Decisions about culture, policy, and major hires would require input from all three groups. No more top-down decrees. No more us versus them, the board agreed. Not because they had to, but because they'd seen what happened when they didn't listen. And then came the day no one expected. It was a Friday. Rain tapped gently against the windows. Evelyn was reviewing applications for the third bridge cohort when there was a knock at her door. It was the intern, the one who'd been threatened, who'd vanished without a trace all those months ago. She wasn't holding a box this time. She was holding a folder. I've been working on something, she said, voice steady now, eyes clear. A proposal for a new compliance training program, one built by people who've actually experienced what happens when it fails. Evelyn gestured to the chair across from her desk. Tell me more. For the next hour, the young woman laid out a plan that was practical, compassionate, and deeply informed by real pain. It included role-playing scenarios, anonymous feedback loops, and mandatory check-ins for high-risk teams. It wasn't about punishment. It was about prevention. When she finished, Evelyn didn't say, "Great job." She said, "When can we roll this out?" The intern blinked. "You're approving it?" "I'm not just approving it," Evelyn said. "I'm asking you to lead it." The young woman sat back, stunned. Then she smiled. The kind of smile that comes after you've been told you don't matter for so long and then someone hands you the keys anyway. That night, Evelyn stayed late again. Not to clean, not to catch up on emails, just to sit in the quiet and look out at the city lights. She thought about all the times she'd walked these halls feeling invisible. All the jokes, the slights, the moments she'd swallowed her pride to keep moving forward. She didn't regret any of it. Because every step, every mop stroke, every ignored comment, every silent observation had led her here. Not to power for its own sake, but to the chance to make sure no one else had to fight so hard just to be seen. The next morning, she sent a company-wide message. No corporate jargon, just plain words, and we've come a long way. But our work isn't done. Real change isn't a single moment, it's a daily choice. To listen, to include, to hold ourselves and each other accountable. You've shown me what this company can be when we stop pretending hierarchy equals worth. So thank you for showing up, for speaking up, for believing we could be better. And if you ever doubt your place here, remember, the person who keeps the lights on is just as essential as the one who turns them on. She didn't sign it co-o. She just signed her name. Over the following weeks, something remarkable happened. People started mentoring each other, not because it was required, but because they wanted to. Teams began sharing credit openly. Mistakes were treated as learning moments, not firing offenses. And the turnover rate? It dropped by nearly half. Even the building felt different. The same marble floors, the same glass walls, but now they reflected people who looked like they belonged. One afternoon, Evelyn passed the old supply closet, the one she used to hide in to catch her breath. The door was open. Inside, a young man from the bridge program was organizing cleaning supplies, not because he'd been assigned to, but because he remembered how it felt to be the one no one saw. He looked up and grinned. "Just paying it forward," she nodded. "That's how it's supposed to work." As the months turned into a year, Evelyn finally accepted the permanent role, but with conditions. She wouldn't take a bonus unless every employee hit their wellness goals. She insisted her office stay on the same floor as the rest of the team, not tucked away in some executive wing. And every quarter she spent one full shift back on the cleaning crew, not as a stunt but as a reminder, because titles fade. Buildings get renovated, but respect, that's the foundation everything else is built on. And in the end, that's what lasted. Not the scandal, not the firing, not even her rise to the top. What mattered was the quiet revolution that followed, the one where people stopped asking, "Who's in charge?" and started asking, "How can we help?" Evelyn never set out to be a hero. She just refused to look away, and sometimes that's enough to change everything.